In 1980, a book appeared which I think of as a kind of sibling to the arrogance of humanism. It was called The Fallacy of Wildlife Conservation, and it was written by John Livingston, a lifelong naturalist and a professor in the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York University. It was a book, Livingston once told me, written in blood, his life's blood. After a lifetime of arguing for wildlife conservation, Livingston took apart the arguments he himself had made and found them all wanting. Everything seemed to come back to what David Ehrenfeld calls the doctrine of final causes, the idea that the end to which something can be put is the cause for which it was created, the idea, as Ehrenfeld says, that gravity exists in order to make it easier for us to sit down, or that rainforests should be saved because they may contain undiscovered medicines. Species and places with no obvious economic usefulness become recreational amenities, prized for their aesthetic value. All arguments circle back on humanity. None can penetrate what Livingston calls the metaphysical dome which encloses human society and cuts us off from the living world. In the light of the fallacy of wildlife conservation, John Livingston began, in effect, a second career, searching for a way out of environmentalism's utilitarian bind, trying to put a retractable roof on the metaphysical dome. We spoke recently in his office at York.
If I have a technique, it has been, I think, to ask the question that my colleague Reg Lang always asks, what is the problem to which this is the solution? And so what I've done mostly is critical analysis, I think, of the statements of the so-called conservation movement, the so-called environmental movement, and so forth. Nobody seems to want to reveal what the problem is that is being addressed by all the environmental placards. I like to say to my students, go out to one of these rallies, read the placards, then put the messages to content analysis, and let's see what we get. And we get zilch each and every time. So what's the problem? I don't know what the problem is. I can easily say it's a metaphysical problem. I can easily say that, and that's the nearest that I can come to it at this point. It's a way of receiving the world that we are forced to accommodate ourselves to. We must receive the world in a certain way. And if that's the definition of metaphysics, then the problem is metaphysical, and everything else flows from that. I think this is what it's about.
Do you have some sense of where the origin of the problem is?
I put the origins back a couple of millions of years. I believe that we are a domesticated species. The other domesticates that we have around us were made that way by genetic manipulation. We contrived in that way to make them just like us. We evolved this way. We're domesticated by, let's call it ideology. I think that ideology is our domesticator, and it's composed mostly of technology. How to do it governs all of our lives, all of our thinking. It doesn't matter whether it's abstract logic. There are rules of logic. There are how to do it, of how to do the most abstract problems. I think that we are the domesticated critters of how to do it, or technology. And I believe we got that way very, very long ago.
Is this because we're slow and hairless and clawless?
Well, our dependence on tools and weapons, of course, was the very first thing, and onward and upward. And of course, the way the brain evolved itself is with the emphasis on, first of all, vision, and secondly, abstraction, is that we became more and more and more the creatures of abstracting how to do things, and we became less and less attuned to the natural world. And that does not mean that we don't have it in us still, because I believe that we do, because we are not genetically manipulated into being domesticated beings. It's the way of life into which we've drifted. And it is as though ideologies and belief systems were prosthetic devices that take the place of natural behavioral modes that we see in every other species in the world. And we've isolated ourselves in that way, I do believe, and felt ourselves quite comfortable with the supportive crutch, this prosthesis, which in simple terms is ideology. And ideology governs everything that we do, everything.
Livingston's idea that belief systems are substitutes for natural forms of behavior has made him wary of the quest for what is sometimes called an environmental ethic, a quest that's been going on at least since Leopold issued his famous call for a land ethic. For Livingston, ethics are part of what he calls the prosthetic paradigm, the technological and ideological crutch which blocks participation in nature. Extending ethical rights to nature, which has no need of them, would only extend our control. It would not help us to relearn participation.
I can't think in environmental terms. I don't know what it means, and I'm not trying to stick a handle around it. I no longer know what environmental means. If you say interspecies, then I will understand a little bit better what we mean. I think I would like to do away with the notion of ethic and behave as our genetic material would have us behave. I know that I can with other beings who don't happen to be human, and I know that they do with me, and I don't think it's necessary to have let's say, a rigidified formula or a code or a 10 commandments about how to behave, because how to behave is in there. It's in my bone marrow. I know it. We did evolve as social beings with a very complex social order, as did many, many, many other species. I think there's something in our numbers that forced us to adopt an artificial way of dealing with social organization when we got past a certain point of density and when our technology became so powerful.
Can you tell me what you mean by saying you know how to behave with other animals?
My tendency with other animals is to listen, and I sometimes feel that I know that there's communication that I share, certainly with my dogs, absolutely with them, but with other wild animals also. I think that they can read you very quickly. I think animals can read you awfully quickly, whether you're tuned into them, as it were, or whether you're not aware of them, or whether you have some aggressive intentions toward them. I believe all that, certainly.
What would be an example from your experience?
Well, where I live, we have animals that come and show no fear at all, either of the dogs or of us. I mean, and nobody has done anything overt to cause that to happen. It's simply that everybody knows everybody else, I think. I believe that there are social orders across species, for certain. I believe in interspecies social relationships and interspecies communication and so forth. I know this, I think, from just seeing the way animals behave without articulating what they're about to do next. Our school system, all of our ideologies, whether they're theological or what, are concentrated so much on the infantile individual self that I think therein lies a great deal of our problem. I believe there is a group self. Certainly there is in the type of social structure out of which we evolved. I'm sure that is so. I think there is even a community self, a cross-species self. I think a community is aware of itself, and the participants therein are aware of themselves as the community, just as you are aware of yourself as your child. There's no difficulty with that. I have no difficulty with my dogs, because they're large ruffians as big as I am, and it's easier that way. But certainly my wife is me, and certainly the animals outside beyond my dogs are me also. I have no difficulty with that at all. This is what enables natural communities, multi-species communities, to function, is the fact that they have a shared awareness of themselves as community, which we have not lost because it lives in us. But we have deliberately shelved it and filed it away in the interest of the human enterprise, of the consumption of what we call resources and what I call nature.
There are many examples of what Livingston calls interspecies social orders. One, which he has cited in his writing, comes from Barry Lopez's book, Of Wolves and Men. Lopez argues that the natural act of predation involves something he calls the conversation of death. The prey, in effect, offers itself, and a mutual decision as to whether the predator will attack seems to take place. As if, Livingston says, there were some ancient interspecies pact arrived at over thousands of years of joint evolution. But there are other, less lethal examples as well.
We were under a coral reef one time, and I noticed that we noticed that my wife and I, we noticed that there was a cleaning station going on, a car wash. Large fishes line up, and they literally line up one tail to nose, and they go through a little place where there are very many small fishes, big as my finger, and these are usually the young of larger species, but they come and pick all the parasites off. They pick off everything that's on the sides of that fish. Fish moves on, the next one moves into place, and they clean him up. And so we just lined up, and there were the little things biting away at us and getting, I don't know that I have any parasites, but they were picking at our skin anyway as we went through, and then we moved on, and a big grouper or parrotfish come in behind you and sit there.
Really?
Good. Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful.
And your sense is that you're simply accepted there as another species.
Well, sure, I'm there. I'm part of it. Why, there's no self-other. I don't believe in self-other. I think that self-other is as much of a problem as any other kind of dualism or dichotomizing. I think it invites the same kind of dichotomy that infests our particular Western culture. Other is eliminated at a community consciousness level. Self is community. There's no more other. The community is me and you are me. I think other is a very big problem. Although many people try to make it work for us and feel it is a positive thing, I do not. I do not like it. It's dichotomizing. I don't think that the cardinal chasing other cardinal is other. They're just playing. I think that other is a terrible stumbling block to participating consciousness. It must be removed or one isn't there. And I doubt very much that the lion sees other. You watch a lion come and hit down a big wildebeest or something, a terrific crash, a bang, and you say, my Lord, if there ever was a vicious self-other situation, it's that. But it's the same thing as an oriole neatly, sharply picking up a caterpillar, there's no difference. And I think he is what he eats. I think he gears down into a simplified self-other configuration for the few seconds it takes to catch the wildebeest or the caterpillar, then gears back up again to a more mature, more developed level of self. I think this is what it is. There's intentionality, but only for seconds. I think the predator has to assume that mode, gear down into low self-other. I see self-other as very low. And do his act, catch his rabbit, whatever he's doing, and then gear back up again to the group self and trot off home with supper. I do think this is what happens. You can see a change in the animal's demeanor.
And so play would be in the higher
Oh, yes.
mode.
Play would be in a much higher mode. And I think practically all territorial chasing that's written up in the book says competition and aggression is play.
Well, can we talk for a minute about the changes in scientific perspective that underlie your view as to what nature is?
I know very few in biology. Biology is still an economistic body of theory, as is evolutionary biology, ecology, both. I see no changes there at all. I mean, territoriality is still sacred. Competition is still sacred. There's no question about that. The only people that are beginning to break this down a little bit, and I'm not totally up to date, I insist, are some of the primatologists, mostly women. And if you look at the work of Lynn-Marie Fettigan, if you look at the work of Donna Haraway, if you look at the work of Shirley Strum, and others and others and others, they're getting an altogether different look at the thing. And the old patriarchal, male-dominated science of primatology is never going to be the same again. It is quite wonderful. You're seeing words like reciprocity. You're seeing words like mutualism. You're seeing all sorts of things, and dominance is shrinking and shrinking into the background. It's just a wonderful thing to see. But I'm only seeing it in primatology. I am. That's all I know about.
So ecology, biology, and mainstream ethology, you think, are still based on these old models of hierarchy, dominance, competition?
Absolutely, they are.
Which, in your view, are drawn from human society and applied.
Well, it's Adam Smith. It's the invisible hand in the marketplace of nature. It's exactly the invisible hand that is still invoked in practically all respectable ecology and ethology. But it ain't natural. I don't believe in domination as a natural phenomenon. It's a pathological situation when you see domination.
John Livingston is confident that he knows what nature is not. He will offer certain confident statements about what nature is, that nature is whole, for example. But when it comes to trying to penetrate the metaphysical dome and prescribing for human society, he grows more tentative. It's hard enough, he says, even to understand what's wrong.
I'm in the business of problem definition, and that's the business that I am in, period. I'm not in the business of solution offering because I'm not confident that I have a sufficient grasp of the problem. It sounds like a cop-out, I know, but in the currency of the technocratic society is solutions, and everybody has got a hard briefcase stuffed with solutions to throw at problems. And if the problem doesn't fit the preferred solution, they will trickily redefine the problem to fit the preferred technocratic solution. This is what the World Conservation Strategy is about. It's what the Brundtland, Our Common Future, is about. They never tell us what sustainable development is, by the way, besides an oxymoron. They don't tell us, ever, what it is. So the currency is solutions. The language is solution-oriented. Nobody, it seems to me, is after problem definition. I think it was Ivan Illich who did say that I'm in the business of problem definition. And once we get the problem straight, it will take cadres of people to work out the solutions. And this is the way I feel, I have always felt as a teacher.
Well, I can certainly understand that you're a step ahead if you're not trying to solve the wrong problem. But I do think that we all have to live day to day.
Yep.
And make decisions. And it seems to me, for example, just an immediate reaction, that out of what you're saying, one could easily draw a priority for children, let's say.
Oh, absolutely.
Now that has many social implications.
I anticipate if it is true, and I believe it to be true, that children need the bonding or imprinting experience on non-human beings at a pre-adolescent time, I agree with this entirely, then the implications of that in our school system are cataclysmic. And the implications of that in all of our other received institutions and patterns of belief are cataclysmic. The enormity of the adjustment that has to be made, if we even agree with that. Because, see, urban kids are not just undernourished in the sense of not having enough access to the heterogeneity of nature. Heterogeneity is the magic word. They're not only undernourished and not having that access, they are absolutely malnourished through cultural conditioning. And malnourishment is a hell of a lot worse than undernourishment. And so we are domesticating our little ones in the school system and in the home system and everything else to be good, willing servants under the metaphysical dome, and never giving them the opportunity to experience the multi-species heterogeneity that their being longs for. And we must provide this.
Why is heterogeneity the magic word?
Because no critter of any kind can fully individuate and mature in a monospecific context. It just cannot. It just cannot. It must explore and experience. And my magic word at the moment is experiential nutrition. I believe that our children are undernourished and malnourished experientially because nobody lets them eat the worm. The worm is dirty. It gets its clothes dirty out in the conservation area. We get them in preschool computers, and the computers don't dirty their clothes or muddy their fingers. And so we get them domesticated at an even earlier age than we used to. This is appalling.
So what domesticates is the whole range of technique.
The essence of
television domesticates.
Yeah, the essence of domestication is dependence. And the human being that's the essence of it.
Yeah.
So the human being is a domesticated being by being utterly and totally dependent on storable, retrievable, transmissible technique in a human-oriented context. And without heterogeneity, without the experience of how other animals live, how other animals feel, how other animals communicate, real problem. You've got a person of arrested development, as Paul Shepard says in Nature and Madness, and a society of arrested development. Now, if we could just arrest urban industrial development, we'd be all right.
Given these explorations of the last 10 years or 15 years, how do you see environmental movements today and the discussions that go on within environmental movements?
I'm sympathetic, I suppose, to all aspects of the so-called environmental movement, but environmentalism, I don't identify myself as an environmentalist. I will not. I'm a naturalist. And since 99.9% of environmentalism is dedicated to the human interest, I simply can't buy it. I can only buy that part of the environmental movement that is working in the trenches of problem definition. And that part, of course, I'm very much interested in. I'm a little worried that there are so few naturalists involved. Practically all of my colleagues in environmental philosophy, or whatever you want to call it, are not naturalists. There are 2 or 3 of us, and that's all. I worry about it becoming a very abstract, very abstruse philosophic enterprise that has less and less to do with the living, breathing, bleeding world.
Could you tell me what you're seeing that creates this alarm?
Yeah, I think when it's all done in the abstract, it's not much. It's no better than any other classical intellectual enterprise, and it's got to involve a sense, an identity with the heterogeneity that is the living world. And if it simply becomes an argument amongst the professional philosophers, well then, I turn the page and go on to something else. As far as the environmental movement goes itself, most of that is how to conduct business as usual and get away with it. Resource conservation has always been prudential. It was always, if you can't be good, be careful. Always resource conservation was that. And that's what sustainable development turns out to be again. It's just a rerun with new slogans of the same old advancement of the human interest and getting away with it.
I think it's probably fruitless to try and pigeonhole you in any way.
I think you shouldn't.
But do you have a sense of where you fit in the current discussions?
I'm not even sure I do. I'm not even sure I do fit into except that I'm satisfying myself by asking the questions that I enjoy asking. And I try to ask them through beings who are not human beings. But I'm committed to understanding what it is that causes the belief structure to be so immobile and so resistant to penetration. I do not understand that, because we're reasonable people all, and we have nice conversations, and we have very, very profound conversations often, but nothing happens. And I think that nothing happens because the overwhelming majority of us did not enjoy that pre-adolescent identification with nature, and if you didn't, it's simply academic talk.